Hi. Um, Yesterday I did a video about the lack of representation in the BMA when they did clap for NHS. And all the major newspapers seem to whitewash all the NHS the faces of the NHS workers. You didn't see any minority. And one of the things that it's kind of precipitated conversations that people are having with me. Um, I shared my views, and also I think sometimes when you talk about issues that affect us, and when you have an knowledge in specific areas, people think you're you're an expert in that area. I choose, obviously, I come from literature background. I'm very passionate about Black literature. I'm very passionate about Black literature for children, diversity books for being available for all children, but most importantly, conscious parenting from very early on is one of those things that I'm very passionate about. I think it's important that our children have high self esteem, confidence, and able to hold their head high. Recently, before this COVID-19 outbreak, there was a video that went viral of a black girl who's was having her hair done. I've forgotten her name, and she was crying and asking why she's ugly or something like that. And it was interesting. Sorry, my toddler came to disturb me. Um, and as I was saying, this video, it went viral. Obviously, this young girl, this almost like a toddler, about 4 year old, she obviously has an issue of self loathing, identity issues. And whenever I saw this post, I really didn't want to watch it. But when I watched it, my first comment was obviously the seed of self love has not been cultivated in her. What are the resources that have been given her from her, from birth until now? Because um, we're living in a time where there's a lot of things available to aid you and help you in promoting the love of culture, the love of high self esteem, and all of that in your children. It might be more expensive than the ordinary Barbie or whatever is on the shelf, but it's an investment. You've got to be able to invest in it. And this has precipitated this topic of made me realize how much we as a parent, I was having this conversation with a brother, how important it is as parents and what we invest in our children. Um, there's this I spoke about lack of BME representation in the NHS, and also how it impacts on the history that will be written, because if the images are have been whitewashed, and up until now we've had all minority doctors that have passed. There were about five on the front line, some retired. And if history is being written now and it's going to be whitewashed, come 100 years later, it's going to glorify those images. As Chinua Achebe quote said, until the lion has its own historian, tales of the hunt will glorify the hunter. And it is, how do we create historians? Do you understand me? We will have to create historians from the point of view of instilling self-esteem, love, the love of our culture, investing in literature and things that promote self-love and so forth. And it comes down to one conversation that I had was representation. For me as a parent, I think it's very important that your interior, your home decor celebrates who you are, whatever. My home is full of books. I have books everywhere. I think my kids, they and that reflects in my toddler. Sometimes I can't find him, and you go and he's got his leg crossed and he's sitting there looking through a book. That's who I am. And so that reflects. The nursery told me that this boy and another boy whose mum is an English teacher, they're the only kids at the nursery that you find them closer to books. Do you understand me? Because this has been cultivated. This is a seed that I have sown into this child before I had him. Do you understand? From when I was pregnant, I invested in books. I invested in toys that looked like him. I books. I don't really buy any books for him unless it's of a character like being sometimes Peppa Pig. But I really don't buy books unless it has an affirmation, positive affirmation on him. I don't buy into his invisibility. I'm very conscious what I put on my children. Does it celebrate his brown skin? Does it bring out his complexion? Does it make him look so I'm very conscious on that, and not everybody is like that, but we are quick. I tell you, this staying at home with children, I can't seem to do anything without them disturbing me. But where was I? This whole thing about instilling that positiveness into our children when it comes to school and Black history, Black culture, and stuff like that. I don't really trust school to do that. It can have quite a negative impact because majority of teachers in school are women. They're white women, coming sometimes from middle class background. They don't really have not to say that Black people don't come from middle class background, but they don't have much in culture much there's not much relationship between them and some of the Black kids that they are teaching. So even if they I've been in class where all sorts of mistakes and derogatory things have been said. I remember being in class where a young white female teacher was talking about India being one of the poorest countries in the world, and I had to get the kids. I said, let's look at the poorest country in Europe. Do you understand me? And I remember I was in the class, and an Asian colleague of mine was in the class, and you could just hear the pin drop. Do you understand me? And so a comment like that will make an Asian child want to shrink. Do you understand me? And for me, I come from EAL background, English as an additional language, and I'm one. Do you understand me? Because English is not my first language. I and I'm very passionate about how these children are taught in a way that don't celebrates who they are. For instance, in English, whenever I had a student that I had to help, and she wanted to write some I think she was doing her English spoken and speaking and listening, and she wanted to do one on African print. So I got her to do one on Kente, and I said I got her to watch The Lost Kingdom of Africa by Gas Casely Hayford. And for me, I said to her, Kente has more history on it, is much more, and she went to do it. And I remember the teacher coming to me to say that so and so scored the highest point on the exam. The examiner was so pleased, and the way that she articulated herself, that there were no more points to give her. She scored the highest. And this was a young girl who was newly arrival. She'd come to the UK, to our area, less than year or so. Do you understand me? And it's important. The reason why she scored high and she articulated herself so well is because she did it based on her culture. Do you understand? She's of Ghanaian descent. And that's celebrated. She didn't have to waffle. She didn't have to eat. She stood up with her head high. And that's, for me, that is really important. I'm not saying every black child should do it, should only do things of black descent, but whatever they are, whoever they are, they should be able to hold their head high. And a lot of it is, I hold parents accountable for it, because when I tutor kids, oftentimes I've got a toddler here. They would they even if you come across English work that is of black writer descent, they don't actually they find it difficult to understand, especially particularly the area that I'm in, which is Shropshire. If the kids are born in Shropshire, then they don't really have any black experiences of black culture, black life, black environment, the urban, they only see it on TV. So when you give it to them, they don't have much to add. It takes quite some time for them to understand it, and it can be quite it's hard to it's hard to see them that way, because you'd expect, because they will complain, oh, we don't understand the old English poems. But then if I give you something of your own culture and you don't understand, I've had friends, children who, whilst they were growing up, I would offer some of the black children's literature that I have, and they absolutely didn't want it. They can't understand it because they won't read it, because the way the black vernacular, the way that black people write, is different from what they're used to. That's because it hasn't been given to them from infancy. It hasn't been cultivated. So they reject that. It becomes and then what happens is, if they keep reading things which are not of their culture, which doesn't celebrate their skin, their hair, then issues of self-loathing seeps into them. Do you understand me? Because if you're always, reading things that are talking about something that is not of you, then how are you going to appreciate who you are? Do you understand me? Which is so important to be accountable as parents, and not just to say, oh, the education system's not doing this. What are you doing? Do you understand me? I think investing in these children's cultural and racial education and identity is as important as giving them vitamins. So you don't expect school to give your children vitamins. You don't expect school to cook your children jollof rice. You see it as your responsibility. Then yes, because then when school does something wrong, as in my oldest son who's 15, who is very self-aware, if school doesn't do something wrong, if school does something wrong, he easily picks it up, which is another thing that I noticed from working in schools, that sometimes some kids can't even pick up on the racial slurs or the derogatory language that is used towards them, because they don't get it. I've given students work that have these things and they don't get it. I remember doing a poem called Nothing's Changed, an apartheid poem with a young man, and he absolutely didn't understand this poem, the language of injustice, the racial discrimination, and it was mind-blowing for me, frustrating, because something like that, if I gave it to my child, he would this is not based on intelligence. Do you understand me? This is based on the lack of identification with the text, the lack of understanding. So therefore, if that is given to them in the curriculum, which it is, and they don't get it, then what is the point? What do we want the school to do? Do you understand me? That's because it's coming from home. Do you understand? If such conversations have not taken place, it's the same thing as educating children about stranger danger, discrimination, sexism, and those kind of things. We have to have these conversations with our children. But oftentimes we love to see when somebody says something, and we will share it because they're saying things that we don't have the courage to say it, or we don't want to be seen as someone who thinks like that, because then that person is radicalized. Because a lot of the time what I find is that parents do not want to give their children things of cultural descent, because they do not want their children to be radicalized, because we associate certain things of ourselves as radicalization. Who taught you that? Who taught you that? Do you understand me? I don't really see anything wrong. I've been accused of being racist because my child has a black doll. Do you understand me? You give him a doll that is not black, he doesn't want it because it doesn't look like him. Obviously, he's a toddler, so I'd have to wait for him to get to a certain age to be able to articulate it for him, to him. Do you understand me? But why do we leave other people to do the job that we should be doing? So as we parent our children, how does who we are, what is in our home, what do we take in, how does that reflect on who the children are? Even the interior decor of our homes reflect on our children's attitude. I am a lover of black art, as you can see behind me. I have two boys, and I have quite a few arts that reflect on that. And I absolutely, sometimes I'll just sit there and just gaze at the beauty of the black boy in the painting. Do you understand me? And it's rare because normally you don't see a lot of that. But for me, I think it's beautiful, and my children will grow up looking at images, art that looks like them. It's very important to me, as important as them achieving A's and B's in school, because when they have that self-confidence, they can stand high, they can stand tall, they can hold their heads high, they can speak, and represent who they are. And that's one of the things that lately is coming across through politics and stuff like that, because with this current situation that we're in, everybody is everyone has caught on Ghana's president. And my cousin just texted me how proud she is about that, Crystal. But you see, this is a British-born Ghanaian girl. I know, growing up in England, I came as a child. There were times that we didn't feel proud. Do you understand me? Images and certain things. But from December, or from last year, when we've had the year of return, and now this president, his sense of humanity through this pandemic, and now we can say, yes, that's our president. Do you understand me? This is not the time, or the 90s, when you see some images of Africans, you think, oh my God, did they put that? I don't want to go to school tomorrow because they're going to talk about what was on TV. We went through that. But now we're not getting that. And that is a sense of pride. But why should you leave somebody to do that work for you? You can do that work in your home with your child. And it's not just about Ghana independence, we put kente on. It's not about wearing African clothes. It's as Nkrumah said, I am African not because I was born in Africa, but because Africa is in me. You understand me? And that is so important. No matter where we are, who we are, who we interact with, we can be who we are unapologetically. Do you understand me? And that is the beauty of it. So, I hope I've answered people's questions in terms of representation and education. Yes, we would want the history written to reflect us, but also when we teach our children to question, to be inquisitive, if there's something that is being taught in school and it's not positive, which my older son is very good at, he will pick it up. His school studied of mice and men, American literature, and there were racial issues in there. The N word is used in there. The teacher didn't pre-warn the class before they did that book about some of these issues. That silly year 9 kids thought it was funny to use the racial slurs in inferring, and he picked it up and he spoke to me. I let it go for a while, and I could see he's not happy, so I contacted the school and I said, what's going on here? Why are you studying literature of such era, of such culture, that you have not taught, pre-warned your children, and not only about the racism in that text, but also in terms of special needs. You need to educate these children. And what I'm not happy about is the fact that this text is supposed to teach. It's not supposed to be something that will make my child, my black child, self-conscious. Do you understand that his blackness all of a sudden is on display because he's uncomfortable? That's not what the text is supposed to do. The text is supposed to teach about, discrimination and racism and all those kind of things. And so they were making excuses initially, the woman, and I said, listen, I'm of a literature background. I don't believe in saying don't study this book. I believe in the book being taught right, but at the same time, what makes me wonder is how many black kids have sat in class while that book has been used, and how many sniggerings or whatever remarks have been made, and nothing has been done until my child gets into that particular class and say, hang on a minute, this is something's not right here. And so the school decided to they thank him for it, asked him to write his emotions about it, and then the whole of the English department decided to have a meeting how that text is being taught. Now, I'm proud of my child for being able to stand up and say, hang on, I don't like that. I'm offended by what you said, and the kids were trying to hide what they said, and I said, no. If that is if that book has made my child feel that way, then it's going to be dealt with. So if the same thing comes to misogyny, we want to teach our children to stand up to equality. So whether it's the discrimination, so it's sexism or whatever, they should be able to pick it up and say, look, that's wrong. But unfortunately, I've noticed through tutoring that it's not like that, and not every parent is of a certain background, of a certain literary background, and that's why I actually enjoy what I do, because not every parent is literate, but me as a person, this is my way of giving back to my community. I love doing the work with the children, because now the small group of children that I have, I can see how happy they are to come to our center and meet each other, because it's not just about, oh, auntie's going to make her study. It's about the social interaction that they have with each other. They love coming there, because apart from church or maybe a party, that's the only time that they are going to meet different black boys, and they're all boys from different across our town, from different areas and different schools, and they can sit and they say all sorts of things. Sometimes I have to correct them, but sometimes you see that love for each other, that banter that they have for each other. They're no longer self-conscious about themselves and of saying things. Yes, sometimes they might say things and I have to correct them. I've often been told, tone it down, it's a business, so make it a bit more comfortable, because I've got black literature everywhere in the room. I've got artwork from my son Drake, Tupac on the wall, and I'm not saying that my business is not open to everybody. It is, but I'm not going to tone it down for anybody to feel comfortable, because it's important that everybody for these children to see that place as a safe zone, so that they can celebrate their blackness. I have different books. Do you understand me? And those books shouldn't only be accessible to black children. White children should be reading that at the same time. But you're not going to go and tell the white woman who's got flour or whatever in a boutique shop that turn it down, Susan, because it makes mommy feel uncomfortable. Do you understand? You're not going to say that. That means you're telling me to apologize for who I am, and I won't. So I hope this kind of clarifies it. It is hard time, and I didn't want to talk about heavy stuff, but it was important that I address some of these issues. But all I can say is that don't wait for someone to educate your child. Do you understand me? You do it yourself. Whether when your child is not doing well in maths, English, you want to hire a tutor for them to boost it up. If your child is having identity issues or whatever, you need to step up. That's not the school's responsibility. You need to step up as a parent to fill in the gap. It's an indication that you haven't done something. You haven't done something that you should have done in the first place. Not to say, not to put blame on parents, because sometimes some parents are not aware. I wasn't aware when my oldest son. But I didn't realize that me growing up, born in Ghana, coming to England, and growing up in London, there, I have a sense that there was nothing that you couldn't take Africa out of me, But having had him in Shropshire, I realized that a lot of his black identity, I had to put it into him. He started coming home from the first week at school, primary school, saying that he doesn't want to be brown anymore. He wants red hair. And I realised, hang on, I had to do so much. Do you understand me? Because I remember we were going to places, or we go to London, and he's overwhelmed by the amount of black people that he see. There's someone, we used to read a book called Ziggy and the Black Dinosaur, and one character was of Caribbean descent, Jamaican descent, Rasta, and it was fascinating for him because he's never come across that. I took that for granted because, who doesn't know a Rasta man? Do you understand me? But for him, as a Shropshire-born black boy, it was something completely alien to him that I had to put it. It's different now because we have more diverse people here, but at that time, it was very hard. So from that experience, my second child, who's 3.5 now, obviously second borns are different, but he is filled with I've cultivated that love very early on, So I didn't panic as I panicked with him, I don't. And so we have to look at ourselves. Do you understand me? We have to take responsibility and accountability for what we invest in our children when it comes to their self-esteem, their social well-being, and their mental, and also their cultural well-being is so important. I have conversations with educators, and they understand these. They say, "Oh, we want to implement it," but they don't. So I don't have any hope in them. I don't expect them to do anything. What are they going to do? A month of Black History, 365 days a year. I want to. What is that? So you need to be able to take that on board as a parent, to put it in yourself. But anyway, I've got to go. Take care and stay blessed.